What's up guys, and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. Today I'm going to be ranking my synths and Grooveboxes from best to worst. None of them are bad, but they're definitely ones that I would recommend more than others and ones that I've gotten more enjoyment and creativity out of than others. And this is not meant to be a flex. The point of this video is to be somewhat of a useful guide to what's out there through my own perspective. And also note that the stipulation to be on this list is that it's got to be either a synth or a music creation platform. So that rules out things like MIDI controllers. Jumping right into the list at number one, my number one favorite synth and music creation platform is, and those of you who have followed me for a while probably saw this coming a million miles away, the Novation circuit. I've mentioned this in a previous video and I want to mention it again. Novation doesn't pay me to whore this thing out as much as I do. They don't pay me at all. And I don't just make a ton of stuff on this because it tends to get views, although you guys do seem to click on and enjoy the videos. I use this thing a lot because this is the fastest way from my brain to a concrete musical idea. The way that the sound engine and workflow and the form factor all come together works perfectly with the way that my brain works and works perfectly with what I want out of a music creation experience. Making music on this thing is fun, it's hands-on, it's super intuitive, it's quick. The wavetable-based sound engine is super deep, and getting or making sound packs for this thing means it feels like you're getting a new device every time you load something brand new onto this thing. Plus, because it's pretty small, it fits easily in a backpack. I can take it to a cafe, not right now obviously, but ordinarily I could have taken it to a cafe and worked out in the open without lugging a bunch of studio gear. And I find working in locations other than just my studio very inspiring. Plus, because it's made by the people who made the Launchpad, it's great for finger drumming and live jamming. It's a very tactile musical experience. Moving on to number two, my second favorite piece of gear is a straight up synth, the Arturia Micro Freak. And even though I'm definitely in the synth YouTube space, I don't own a lot of traditional synths, if that makes sense. Standalone synths. This is the one traditional synth that I own, but this synth is anything but traditional. This thing has multiple synth engines in it, ranging from your very typical subtractive and analog synthesis style stuff to wavetables and even weirder stuff that's capable of some pretty wacky out there sounds, which I'm all about, being into bass music and being into stuff like vaporwave and some kinds of electro that are a little bit more off the beaten path and a little stranger. This thing is capable of all of that. Very gritty sounds and then very strange and out there sounds and very pretty sounds as well. This thing is extremely versatile, very powerful, got a ton of great presets in it as well, so you can reverse engineer them or just use them in tracks. And the keyboard is actually pretty dope. This was a thing that people were a bit iffy about getting into it, but it allows for added expressiveness, both sliding around on notes and sliding around on the notes themselves. And if you don't come from a piano background, like I do, I come from a drums background and an electronic music production background, this feels good to play. So yeah, I like this synth a lot. I've been able to make some heat with it, and it's great for both modern and gritty stuff and for kind of old school stuff that synth nerds typically are more into. Number three on my list will seem like a little bit of a flex, but bear in mind that I got this years ago. My third favorite piece of gear is the Opie1. This is the synth that got a lot of people in my generation of producers, including myself, interested in the world of physical synths and portable music making devices. Whether we saw it on an Andrew Huang video or a Jeremy Blake video, this thing is incredibly appealing to a lot of people because of its super sleek design and wacky synth engine. And while both of those things are undeniably cool, the thing that really makes this stick for me is its workflow. Now that I've used multiple self-contained portable production stations, I can say that this is unlike any of them. In a way, the way that you layer sounds and whatnot is like a DAW where you're recording only audio and no MIDI. And it's not just a workaround to a technical limitation, but in my mind, it's a feature in of itself. And it means that whether you're using the decently unusual synths and effects directly in here, whether you're working with chopped up samples or whether you're recording directly into this with an external synth. The tape feature makes that possible. And once again, it's just a different workflow than anything else, and it's one that I've come to appreciate over time of using this thing. And I briefly mentioned sampling. This thing's sampling abilities are pretty phenomenal. You can sample the radio, which is cool. You can sample anything that you plug into the internal input, and you can sample that either in the synth, so you get a pitched sample, you can sample that into the drum kit and have an actual drum kit, and you can actually chop up samples and properly flip a sample for that kind of hip hop production. And of course, this thing is super small and super portable, yet it's built fantastically. Over time, I've come to really appreciate this thing, and I would say that my favorite songs that I've made on portable devices have all been made on this one. The OP1 is definitely not for everyone, and it's definitely not the only way to get into making music on a small, self-contained device. That market is getting more full of devices every day, which is awesome. But yeah, this will always hold a special place in my heart. Moving on to number 4, my fourth favorite is the Korg Electron. This right here is the synth version, and it's pretty dope. Out of all the synths that I own, this one feels the most ancient. Ancient is a strong word, but this one feels the most like a throwback to another generation of gear, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because it does have some pretty modern features like its ability to export individual tracks as WAV files, and its sound design engine is wavetable based, which is great. It's got some decent sampling. It's got the Chaos pad. It's decent for jamming, and it's got hella tracks, which is lovely. So for music making on the go, in terms of the ability to layer stuff, this is probably the most impressive. And unlike the Novation circuit, you can actually do your sound design directly on this. Well, you have to do your sound design from scratch directly on this all the time, which for some people might be a little frustrating. It's nice to just pick a preset and immediately start creating, but it's also really nice to be able to design a sound from scratch and see where that takes you creatively, or just have a sound in your head and immediately make it right on this. That's great. So I really do like the Electribe. I don't like it as much as the circuit, and it's not as fun to use as the circuit or the OP1, and the synth engine isn't as powerful or as in-depth as the Micro Freak, so that's why it lands at the number 4 spot. But this thing is dope. It's grown on me over time. I've made some pretty dope music with it, in my opinion. Everything from synthwave to heavier bass music like electro house. It works best for stuff that has the built-in expectation of being a little more lo-fi, but working within those constraints can lead to some pretty sweet results. Also, bear in mind that everything that this puts out, and for that matter, everything the OP1 puts out, is mono. You can definitely do stuff in post with OP1 and or Electribe tracks to bring out stereo width, like adding reverbs or choruses or panning different elements left and right, but it's at least something to be aware of. It is a bit of a constraint, and it contributes to that kind of lo-fi feeling you get out of these devices. If you're looking to get a second Groovebox, say you already have the Novation circuit or the MC101 and you're looking to double up, and the OP1 is understandably not worth the price, the Electribe is a really good one to go for. If I could only own 2 Grooveboxes, it would be the Novation circuit and the OP1. But if I had to start completely from scratch buying only 2 Grooveboxes, it would be the Novation circuit and the Korg Electribe synth version. Moving on to number 5, my 5th pick is the Roland MC101. This is a synth that, as of right now, I have some mixed feelings about. That's probably partially because this is the newest addition to my collection and I haven't spent a whole lot of time with it yet, but also because this thing's a little bit weird. It's weirdly expensive for the size and capabilities, but also the size to me is a feature, not a bug. This thing is both gorgeous and adorable, and while I was frustrated and still am frustrated by parts of the workflow, especially if you say mess up when recording in a part, editing that can be a gigantic pain in the ass, I can't deny that this thing has some perks to it. The ability to use this as kind of an audio interface that can export all 4 of these tracks at once live while jamming is pretty unique to this device and has made for some pretty polished sounding jams. I've got one that'll be coming out on this channel at some point that I finished the other day that actually kind of blew me away with how polished it sounded. It sounded like something that was just made in a DAW from the very beginning. A big part of it was that I did mix it in my DAW, but I had really good sounds to work with, and the fact that I could export those individual sounds meant I could mix them in a DAW and give them the polish that that track needed. And it ended up being this nice polished dance tune that actually sounds like it could stack up to anything else on, say, Revealed. As I mentioned in my dedicated first impressions review of this, I like it, but I'm not so sure I love it. It definitely is capable of making some pretty dope sounding music, and it is the smallest out of any of the Grooveboxes. And once again, I adore this form factor, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as your first Groovebox, especially for the price. Moving on to number 6. This is the Boss RC202 looper. And actually, this is a piece of gear I really have no complaints about. It only lands at this point in the ranking because I don't use it as much as I thought I would, and it's not one that I like immediately reach for if I'm trying to make music or take down a musical idea. As far as loopers go, this is one of the best out there. I would say not quite as good as its big brother, the 505, which I have lusted after for a while, but this definitely gets the job done. If I want to make an entire arranged song on the fly using this thing, that does require a bit of editing in post to make that coherent, just because there's only so much you can do to mute and unmute tracks because there are only 2 of them, but you can stack a ton of layers on this thing. It's got kind of a surprising amount of inputs. If you're in the market for a looper and can't spring for the 505, which would be my first choice, this is definitely worth getting. And finally, coming in at number 7 at the bottom of the list, the Pocket Operator. This is the PO33KO. This I tend to think of more as a toy than as a legit musical device. Even though it is a legitimate musical device, it's pretty limited and it's super lo-fi. Making an entire song on this thing is kind of a pain and not necessarily worth it in terms of the polish of the product that you end up with. This is definitely much more meant for just kind of sampling stuff around you and random sounds and throwing together quick little beats and musical ideas and then doing short, fun little jams, which is definitely not a bad thing. Devices like this are a music tinkerer's dream, and there is something incredibly nerdy about like the way it's built and the way it functions. It's a little bit like a mini Novation circuit, a bit less intuitive than that. There are some weird quirks in terms of learning its workflow. It's fun, and for its intended purpose, it does the job, but I rarely find myself reaching for it. And that's the list, so that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this gives you an idea of what you might be interested in if you're currently in the market for some new music production gear or platforms. Let me know in the comments what your favorite pieces of music production gear are, and if you'd like to see another video, you can click or tap up over here. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a couple of days. Peace.